everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about what I consider one of the most important things when you're homeschooling autism, and that is learning the developmental age of your child versus the chronological age. So we're going to learn what that is, and then we're going to learn how to figure that out, and then we're going to learn why it's so important. So thanks for joining me. I forgot to tell you, I'm Penny with Our Crazy Adventures in AutismLand.com, and the title of this live is What If You've Been Teaching the Wrong Age of Your Child This Whole Time? Because if you're teaching to their chronological age, it's going to be way more difficult than if you figure out what their developmental age is. So what's the difference between the two? Let's start there. Their chronological age is the actual age of your child. It's like, I always like to describe it to moms as the chronological age is the age of your child's physical body. Like, there you go. It doesn't take into account any social or emotional aspects of it. It's just the age of your child. It's when your child was born. We all know that. So for educational purposes, though, the chronological age is not very it's not useful information. It doesn't help you out at all to know the chronological age of your child. We all know it. So the developmental age, however, is the age where your child can successfully complete skills. So I like to say that the developmental age is the age where your child can do 80% of the developmental checklist successfully. So for example, yesterday when we talked about homeschooling autism, I told you that Logan was 10 when his little sister Maddie started kindergarten. She was 5. There's a five-year age difference, and there's about a 5-year developmental difference. So when we started teaching Maddie kindergarten, even though Logan was 10, we just brought him into the kindergarten with her because that was his developmental age. So he needed to learn kindergarten stuff, but he also needed to play with kindergarten kids, and he needed to hang out with, learn how to interact with other kindergartners, even though he was 10. It was easy for us because he had a kindergarten sister. So he just sort of tagged along to story time and things like that that you go to. But those are great places to find it. But it can be, the developmental age can be significantly lower than their actual chronological age. So I always like to warn people about that first, because it can be a bitter pill to swallow that your 10-year-old is really at a kindergarten level, or your 13-year-old is really doing first or second grade work. So you really need to prepare yourself for that when you start figuring out their developmental age. Now, it's not the maturity level, it's just where they can do 80% of the skills, as we talked about. So it doesn't matter how mature they are, it is the developmental age is where you need to be so that you can plug in some developmental gaps and then sort of move them along. So it's important information to know. So progress will come faster and with far less stress when you know the difference and you use it to your advantage. It's like super frustrating to try to teach a concept to your child that he just isn't getting. Now, it's possible he's not getting it because he doesn't have the executive functioning skills yet. And part of that is because you're teaching above his level to his chronological age instead of teaching below his level to his developmental age. So that's why it's important to know the developmental level so that you're teaching at that level and he can continue to make progress. You all know that my mantra is even slow progress is still progress. So, progress is progress here for our little guys. Now, the developmental level, I hit the wrong slide, I'm sorry. He can be advanced in some areas and sort of behind in others. So the developmental level can sort of vary. When you do, and I'll put in the comments a link to my blog post where you can find the checklist and all that. When you do the checklist for what your child can do, you want to pick whatever age he's at that he can successfully complete at least 80% of the skills. So for example, when we did Logan's, he could do 80% of 4-year-old skills, but he could only do 15 to 20% of 5-year-old skills. So we took him back to the 4-year-old skills and continued to work there. Now, some of you are saying, why didn't you go to 5? Because he had most of 4. Because you want him to feel successful too. So you want him to be able to do those skills, push him a little bit out of his comfort zone so that he acquires the new skills, but then bring him back to where he's comfortable. No one wants to hang out somewhere where they don't know what they're doing at all times. So you bring him back to the level so that he is he's comfortable and he feels successful, because when he feels successful, he's going to want to do more for you. That's very important. If you make your child feel like he's smart and he can do this and he wants to try, then he's going to. But if he feels like he's the village idiot and he never gets any of these concepts, he doesn't even want to try because he feels incompetent. And no one wants to do something that they think they're going to be bad at. So in order for the I misspelled that word in that sentence and got a little sidetracked, but mirror neurons in the brain need to fire in the undeveloped areas. That's why you bring them back to their developmental level, because they have gaps there that they either missed because they just didn't think, you know, our kids with autism's brains are wired a little differently. So they just didn't get it at that time. Or if your child was recently in public school, they continued forward even though he didn't have that concept yet. So without getting that first concept, he can't get all the other ones because he doesn't have the executive functioning skills to do that. And by going back and filling in those gaps, you also work on the executive functioning skills that he's going to need in order to do higher level thinking or higher level subjects. So you really need to go back and teach those so that those undeveloped areas of the brain can go ahead and fire and make new synapses, and then that's what helps with executive functioning. So that's why it's so important. How do you find out their developmental age? I've harped on you need their developmental age. So how do you find it out? Okay. First, you want to do a developmental checklist. You can go on Google and find them. You can go to the CDC website and they have developmental checklists by age there. My caveat for that, just like earlier, is that you need to prepare yourself for doing the checklist and realizing that your child is at this level. Now, you're not going to realize that your child is behind his peers in social and emotional. You already know that. But finding exactly where he is helps you find out where you need to start so that you can get him back up with his peers. But you can't keep going when he's 5 or 7. You can't keep going at that age level if his developmental level is still 5, because you're just making bigger gaps and nothing's going to work. So I like to get down on the floor and just play with the kids. I play with, no bells and whistles. No, I'm not wanting anything from them. I just get on the floor and play with them, or I take them to the park where they play with other kids. I normally take them to the park when all the public school kids are in school, only because the park can be sensory overload. So you need to make sure of that. And a lot of times when the bigger kids are in school, some of the smaller kids are at the park, and you can really see how they interact with younger kids. So you can ask others who interact with your child. If you have a babysitter, you can ask her, hey, what age do you think he is? Now, if your 10-year-old is still watching Paw Patrol, I'm going to tell you he's at the preschool level. You sort of already know that. Logan watched Blue's Clues for a long time, and it never occurred to me that because that was his developmental level. I just thought he liked it, and he's a creature of habit, as we are, and that it gave, it just made him happy to watch it. And then we learned that that it did make him happy to watch it. He is a creature of habit, and it also spoke to him because that was his developmental level. So looking for things like that are a great way to know their developmental level. I still highly suggest that you do a placement test, or go to the CDC website and do a developmental checklist. They're those checklists that they say at age 1, they should be able to do this, and age 2, they should be able to do that. When Logan started kindergarten, he couldn't drink from a cup. So we learned that, hey, kindergartners are supposed to drink from a cup. So we just looked back, and it was, you know, where you're supposed to drink from a cup, and see where he was. So that's what the developmental checklist is going to show you. It also sort of gives you ideas on what you need to work on. Like, we needed to work on successfully drinking from a cup, because that's expected out of kindergartners. So other things to consider are that his academic and cognitive level may be different. We talked about this yesterday when I said that lots of times, especially with writing, because of their gross motor planning and their executive functioning skills and then their fine motor, they can tell you a really great story, but they can't necessarily write it down. So it's important that in some of those tests, especially homeschool placement tests, that maybe you let them orally tell you the answer, or you write it down for them or whatever. Because sometimes we have to make accommodations for some of their weaknesses, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their development. It just means that they have weaknesses, and we're still working on that in OT or PT or speech or whatever. You also want to look at their social emotional skills. Now this is where most kids with autism are severely behind. You're looking at their communication. Can they do back and forth conversations? Can they answer the WH questions, like who, what, when, where? Things like that. When you say, are you hurt? Can they say yes and tell you where? So those are some things. Their play skills and social skills are pretty much, they sort of go hand in hand. Can they play with other kids their age? Which probably not. So at what age can they successfully play with other kids and not get overloaded or have a meltdown or just not be able to do it? Now you can work on play skills and social skills anywhere. Like, you can work on social skills when you go to the grocery store. You can work on play skills when you're at the park, or you can work on both of them if you happen to go to church. Another thing to consider is that impulsivity in our kids is and behavior, the ability to regulate their body and impulses will tell you pretty much what developmental level it is. So if he's 10, like when Logan was 10, he would have gotten trouble at school for his impulsivity and his behavior issues. But really, he was acting like a typical 5-year-old because that was his developmental level. So knowing that level also helps you know that sometimes they just can't help it. Like, they gotta touch it, or they gotta, it doesn't, they just don't think, they just go. And so knowing that your 10-year-old really is 5 helps you when you discipline, or when you need to remember and take a breath and be like, yeah, that's exactly what a typical 5-year-old would do. Here's how I would approach it with a typical 5-year-old, and then go from there. So we ask a lot of our kids, especially with impulsivity and behaviors. Like, we want them to sit still in church when they're bigger, and we want them to, be able to walk with us through the parking lot and things like that. But sometimes they simply can't. So knowing their developmental level will give you a sense of, I don't know, relief is the word I'm looking for, but then you will just know, hey, yeah, that's typical for him because that's where he's at. And it sort of helps you keep from getting into that, the circle of feeling terrible that your kid can't do this. So, depression and things like that. But knowing that okay, he's fine, we're working on that, and that's to be expected of him, will help you immensely. So some of the neurological reflexes too will be a little off. Again, that's because you haven't made those pathways in the brain in the undeveloped areas yet. So for Logan was so floppy for such a long time, it drove me crazy. Like, he literally couldn't control where his body was going in space. He just couldn't. He didn't know how to do it. But then knowing he had severe hypotonia, which just means it's super low muscle tone, so he couldn't control his body. But also knowing that a lot of little kids don't know where they are in space. Like, that's one of the things you learn as an executive functioning skill, is where your body is, and compared to the people around you, so that you're not just, running into things and all that. So it was important to know that that was typical for where he was developmentally. We did have a problem, and we did need to go tell his occupational therapist. We ended up going to physical therapy and a couple other, hippotherapy for that. But it also helped to know that because he had not made those neurological connections yet, I was expecting too much of him. So that made me feel better, because I didn't think, oh, I'm doing something wrong. And then that helped him, because I knew that that's not where we needed to be. So that's why you want to know the difference between you can just forget their chronological age, because it doesn't help you at all with homeschooling or anything like that. But knowing their developmental age and then being able to approach it from there is very important. So I'm going to put some links in the comments below. I'll put a link to the developmental checklist for the CDC website, and I'll put a couple blog posts I've written on it in there. So if you have any questions, or if you want to know more about how to find your child's developmental level, just throw me a comment below and I'll help you out. Thanks. Have a great day.